joining me up here, Jim Mitchell with the Dallas Morning News, editorial page writer for the Dallas Morning News. Jim has been with the Morning News since the 80s, 1980s. Yes. He's been on the editorial board since 1997, I believe it was.
That's about right, yeah.
Longtime friend. We talk fairly often, and so glad that he could join us here for this discussion. Let me kick it off with this. You say in your book, his last book, Shame, How America's Past Sins Have Polarized Our Country. You say in here that you were the child of a civil rights activist, and they had you out being a civil rights activist at your youngest years.
Yes.
You sort of followed that path for years. You said in your book you never voted for Ronald Reagan, but about the middle of his second term, something began to change. Tell us what happened.
How much time do we...
Give us the abbreviated version.
I'll give you
the Cliff Notes version.
Abbreviated version. It was a personal change. My parents were civil rights activists, and so I was involved in that. I was a civil rights baby. Grew up in that world in Chicago, and so don't remember a time when that race and politics was not a huge discussion in the family and so forth. But when I got to college, the Black Power movement came in. Well, wow, okay, this is going to be an extension of the civil rights movement, and we're going to go this way. And I was involved in that. I was intrigued. My wife and I jumped on an airplane, flew all the way to Algiers, Algeria, because the Black Panthers were hiding out there in a house that had been given to them by the Algerian government. And we hooked up with the Panthers there, and it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. I very quickly realized that the Panthers were thugs. There were guns everywhere. There was not the faintest intellectual discussion whatsoever, but they were thugs. And I quickly digested that. I won't bore you with all the story. I tell it in my last book. But I digested that. Black Power was not a way forward. It was a dead end. It might feel good at the moment. You can, raise your fist to the air and so forth, but it wasn't going to take care of the kind of development, basic development, primarily educational development, that Black America needed at that time and continues to need. It wasn't set up for it. It was just Black Panthers, as I said, it was like somebody walking down the street and throwing a voodoo doll on the porch of the white man. We'll scare the hell out of them. We'll goose up that whole the white guilt thing. We'll let them really see how angry we are. And don't play with us, don't mess with us. And well, it's okay, it's fun, but where's it going to go? Well, I won't, to answer your question, many other episodes like that, but for somebody who was fanatically left-wing, raised that way in civil rights, chip by chip, little incident by incident, I can remember working hard and when I just got out of graduate school and I had to take a city bus, didn't have any money to buy a car, to go to work and teach and blah, blah, blah. And there was a kid on the bus that one morning who was sort of laid there, kind of relaxed and happy. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, and this was a black, had no job, wasn't going to school. And it occurred to me something was deeply wrong with that picture. And then I began to actually pay attention to American life, and I have to say that's when I began to sort of carefully, cautiously read some things that were conservative and understand, and I must give credit to my greatest writer who influenced me the most is Ralph Ellison. wrote The Invisible Man. It's the greatest American novel of the 20th century. But he understood the gifts that blacks had and the pride that they could have if they followed in that direction and absorbed some of those principles of individual responsibility, of hard work, of that was the way ahead. But we kept, as black Americans, kept being bought off by white guilt. Whites would be there at the end of the day offering things. Our politics in America became about social programs. Supreme Court has argued affirmative action how many times now? I can't count. And we're still like as though there's still, government is still the solution. And if you don't get them on your side, you'll never get anywhere. Well, government is the kiss of death. Government, when people are down, government is the worst thing that can happen because it communicates to them that they're helpless and that only the great white America can save them. And they can't do it themselves. What I liked about Ronald Reagan, and it took me a while, he, like Donald Trump, was not deferential. He wasn't kowtowing to black militants. We had this year the Democratic candidates all going to Harlem and kissing the ring of Al Sharpton. What an ugly corruption that is. I mean, on so many levels, you don't know where to begin. The kind of implication there, I'll contain myself. But it's humiliating as a black to see that. And so much of what America has done last 60 years, since the 60s, it's just been, it's been the darkest time in our history for blacks, possible exception of slavery. But it's a kind of slavery. It's a kind of racism. To keep using your race to diminish your humanity. My feeling is that's, what are we getting that's worth that? Nothing.
Let me carry that a little further. How and why did the civil rights movement stall, or at very least never move forward, much beyond the tactics of the 1950s and the 1960s?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. They did, after the Civil Rights Bill, Voting Rights Act, housing law, and you know, the presumption was everywhere. I worked in some of the war on poverty programs in those days. I worked in East St. Louis and other beautiful cities. But the presumption was that we would just zoom ahead. Now that we know it was illegal to discriminate against us, and then we would zoom ahead. We stalled, as you say. It's a very good word. We stalled, and I think because what did it to us? Whites and blacks have always lived in a symbiotic relationship. And what happened at that moment was that we thought that our way out was white guilt. And white America thought their way out was white guilt. We're the richest country in the world. Let's give them something. Let's give them. And so, though the beauty of the civil rights movement for me is it was black people who did that, who took those risks, who demonstrated, who contained themselves, who brought a moral focus to that movement that was inspirational to everybody. And then to give that up to some government bureaucrat who's going to tell you, you know, how many blacks can do this, and I remember working in the war on poverty programs, and they didn't even know really what to do. But they wanted to pay us for going to work every day so that they were doing something. And that's where I mentioned the issue after the Holocaust, the Jews created Israel. They left. Well, after the civil rights movement's victories, we did not leave. And so the symbiosis that we had with the larger society just continued. And we've spent all of our time, all up to this very moment, manipulating whites, thinking that's our way. We can just get them to see how painful it is. So now you go to any university in America, and all they're teaching is that blacks are victims, that they're helpless. You know, slave masters didn't do that. As my good friend Robert Woodson says, two people I can't stand anymore: angry blacks and white liberals.
I'm glad you said that, because you grew up in Chicago, I grew up in Chicago, and you know, we used to call the folks along Lakeshore Drive the lakefront liberals. Or in Washington, you hear the expression limousine liberals. Mm-hmm. Basically, people who come out of the high rises and basically tell the black community what's wrong with the black community. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about this idea of how, for lack of, just elaborate on the idea of white guilt some more. Just why that exists. I mean, you've suggested that, you know, that being white and guilt are obviously part of the question, but there's a pathology beneath that, and I'm trying to get a little deeper into that pathology. It's just not just a case of I'm trying to make up for past sins. It seems to me there's something deeper than that.
Absolutely, there's something very deep. Fascinates me, and I think it is now the core problem in race relations in America. The problem, I think, goes to the fact that white Americans, you see, when America did, in one of the greatest acts of bravery, is that me? One of the greatest acts of bravery in history was achieved by white Americans. White Americans have made, I grew up in segregation. I know all about it. White Americans today are different. They don't want to be racist. They don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to think that that's a part of who they are. They have evolved, different kinds of people. And yet still, they live under and are vulnerable to the accusation that they're a bigot. And all we need to do, you know, look at what they call Trump all the time. 10 times a day they call him a racist. How can you be that racist? And, you know, my train of thought.
Okay. Let me take this as a slightly different direction. Arthur Ashe, the late tennis player, when he was dying of HIV/AIDS, he was interviewed by I believe it People magazine. It was like the last question of the interview, and literally as they were walking out of the room. And the interviewer said, you know, what's the thing that you fear most? What's the thing you regret most? What bothers you most? And of course, the interviewer expected the question to be, I'm dying of this incurable disease. And he said that America's biggest problem is unrequited relationship with race. Your thoughts?
Yes. Well, you know, again, whites are in this position where they're so vulnerable, and whites need to think about it and explore it and so forth and inform me about it. But, you know, in terms of classic psychological terms, whites live beneath the accusation that they're evil. And then there's all this historic evidence, slavery and so forth. And so that's a heck of a way to be born. You know, it's the same psychology. That's not complicated if when a child is born. if right away you begin to say, well, this child is stupid, and other people say that, that child's going to be fighting against that for his entire life. I'm not stupid. Or I'll get you this way. I'll show you how smart. And you put that accusation. Let's go to the best writer on this is Franz Kafka, and The Trial and so forth. Joseph K. Some of you may know that novel, where he wakes up one morning and he's just charged with a crime and they don't even tell him what it is. But there's an accusation against him out there in the ether. And he spends the rest of his life trying to appease that, deal with that, because he can't stand the thought of being, it's the unfairness of it, the outrage of it. And so the problem here is that white people will give black people anything they want. White people can be shaken down in a minute. And as long as they offer the white person a little bit of moral authority. And that's a dynamic that is killing our society. It's really hurting us profoundly. We've lost our university systems now. We've lost K through 12 education, which is all preaches black victimization from sun up to sundown. Never teaches black dignity.
Let me ask one more question, then we'll get to the cards. I don't want to shut you out of this conversation. A lot of people say that diversity isn't just a cultural issue. It's an economic imperative. I mean, look at the demographics of the nation. It's a business imperative. How do you reconcile that in your mind in terms of representations on boards, representation in classrooms, and the like?
Well, what makes it an imperative? Diversity. I don't think it's, I don't even, number one, what is it? I don't know what it is.
Well, I think someone would.
Maybe it is if I can't get that job, then you don't practice diversity, and you're a racist, and so forth and so on. In other words, I feel a little bit empowered by it, and but I think I think whites live under this pressure.
Just to be clear, I didn't necessarily mean that. What I meant was, from a business perspective, you have to meet your customers. Yeah. So there's a business imperative to being a diverse corporation. Is there not?
Right. I would say no. Okay. I would say that's just a nice excuse for. I think any organization, as far as I'm concerned, that's preoccupied with diversity is a part of the problem, not the solution. I'm a citizen of the United States. I was born and raised in the United States. I love the United States. Why do I have to go out and be somehow accountable for my race? And because some white person says, we'll have diversity, and they just absolutely love the word diversity because it's so amorphous. It doesn't mean anything. They can put on a face and, yeah, I like it. We should be more diverse. What we're dealing with is white America struggling for ways to build moral authority, to redeem themselves, to dissociate themselves from all this past evil. And it creates a certain desperation in white life. You live in society with a kind of terror. When I was a kid, whites didn't feel that way in segregation. My 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Burgess, would pull me aside and say, look, you're black in this school of mostly whites. You better watch yourself, because they'll hold it against you. This is, and Would Mrs. Burgess's older white lady tell a kid that today? She was helping me out. She was pointing reality to me. Learn how to deal with this situation. And number one, study hard. There are no excuses. Well, that's, that is, we now deny that to black people because we're not concerned with black people. Never were, maybe never will be, but certainly haven't been. We're not concerned with black people. We're concerned with whites. Almost all of our racial policy is designed to work with this new post-60s anxiety that goes along, that whites are now born into in ways that they never were before.
So several questions along the lines of, is this white deference essentially racist? And if it's an attempt to try to cover the sins of the past, but it's inappropriate, is there a way to amend for the sins of the past without doing deference?
It's not up to us. It's not up it's not up to government. How would you amend the sins of the past? You live with the sins of the past. And you must, as an individual and as a society, be enlightened by the sins of the past. Understand how terrible they were. And we can hope and pray that you will be more humanized by that, and that the society will be better for your moral evolution. But for you you can't do the idea that you can somehow appease the past is another one. As soon as you hear someone say that, you know they're lying. You know they're not being honest with themselves, which is what they should be saying is, you know what, I'm scared as hell. They're going to call me a racist. They're going to hold it against me at work and everything. And if there's a black there at work and I say he's not doing a good job, oh my God, I don't have the authority to say that. I don't have the authority to enforce discipline. How are we going to get anywhere that way?
So last question, because we've got the Sumner scholars to go to that meeting. We've got a lot of young people here. Mm-hmm. How should they address this issue as young people?
They should not worry and think about it so much. They should assume that their morality is their morality. They want to, we all do, want to be responsible for being good people. That's it. That's at the end of it. That's over with. All of these artificial concepts, inclusion, diversity, so forth, that's a no-win. That's a no-win situation. What you will learn there is how to be smooth and slick, how to fool people, how to play the game. That's what you'll learn there. You won't learn anything more than that. And the only thing that's going to save us, black, white, and otherwise, is some elevation of our sense, our integrity. Am I a racist or not? If I slipped up and said, if I used the word colored people instead of people of color, does that mean I'm condemned to hell? Forgive yourself a little bit. You know when you're really being racist and when you're not. And I have to, as a minority, trust that. I have to have good faith that people will be good in the long run. That's the challenge. That's a challenge. I will admit, I say this to blacks. It's a challenge to believe that. We come from a culture for years, everybody's parents, you're going to run it, racism, racism, racism. It's going to, and so it's in our head. But we also know as that our moral being is dependent on us. Not what position you take. In other words, you can be against a diversity program in your workplace and still be a decent human being. That's where we have to go. In fact, if you're advocating a diversity program and I'm there, I'm going to call you a racist. You're being slick again. You're trying to create an optic of innocence.
Well, join me in thanking